24 billion francs. That's how much was spent, not to build a nation, not to save lives, but to kill one man, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. He wasn't targeted by the West. No, the order came from next door, from a brother, a fellow African leader, with roots tangled deep in the very soil they both claimed to protect. In a region already bruised by decades of colonization, coups, and corruption, what happens when the blade is held not by the foreigner, but by your own blood? This isn't just the story of an attempted assassination. It's a chilling web of mercenaries, media manipulation, and a secret war fueled by greed, silence, and betrayal. And at the heart of it all stands one soldier, refusing to kneel. Now, before we begin, the events you're about to hear are a dramatized reconstruction based on real tensions, rumors, and leaked reports from within West Africa. While names and details have been woven into a fictional narrative, the emotions, struggles, and questions this story raises, they're real, too real to ignore. So ask yourself, what happens to a continent when the greatest enemy wears a familiar face? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Ouagadougou, 2:37 a.m. The night was unusually quiet, too quiet. Even the dogs weren't barking. In the pitch-black sky, a single military chopper sliced through the silence like a needle through fabric, its blinking red lights the only movement above the sprawling savannah. Inside, Colonel Daouda Sori, the commander of Burkina Faso's Western Defense Division, was hunched over a tablet. He wasn't texting, he was reading names. Names of suspected traitors within the army. Names only 3 people in the entire country knew about. A low thump jolted the rotor blades, then another. Not gunfire, not lightning, interference. The pilot glanced at his panel. Something was wrong. The digital GPS map suddenly shifted 3 kilometers east. Then again, a blue reroute line appeared. "Colonel, we're being redirected. Did you authorize this?" "No." He leaned forward. The screen now showed they were flying toward an uninhabited forest near the Tanghin district, an old rebel hideout during the 2005 crisis. And then, everything turned white. A blinding flash. The chopper spun violently. Warnings screamed across the dashboard. Altitude dropped. Engines failed. The last thing Colonel Daouda said before impact was, "They found us!" Ouagadougou, Military Command, HQ, 0308 M. 3 phones rang simultaneously. General Kawanda was first to pick up. He didn't speak. He just listened. His face didn't change. Yet behind his eyes, something shattered. "Colonel Daouda, killed in crash. No survivors, no distress signal. Just gone." Within minutes, the crisis response unit was activated. The wreckage had no bullet holes, no signs of ground assault, but the GPS logs had been wiped, remotely, from inside their own system. Underground intelligence briefing room, 0417 AM low light. Concrete walls. A red map of Burkina Faso lit up with heat signals. The director of internal surveillance leaned in. "This wasn't a malfunction," she said softly, almost whispering. "It was a ghost." "A ghost," she tapped a file. Colonel Daouda's flight route was spoofed using military-grade GPS jammers, only available to 3 units in West Africa, and none of them belonged to us. Then she slid a photograph across the table. It was a grainy image from the airport hangar the night before. A man in plain clothes loading a small black case into the tail of the helicopter. Not part of the flight crew. Not in the logs. "We believe the device was manually installed, triggered remotely. Inside job. Possibly deeper than we thought." General Kawanda's jaw clenched. "This was no accident." He glanced at the photo again. "I've seen that man before. In Ivory Coast." The room fell silent. Someone finally spoke what everyone was thinking. "So it's true then? They've crossed the line." The emotional hook at dawn, soldiers lined up in silent formation to honor the fallen colonel. No music, just the slow flutter of the national flag in the dry Sahel wind. Captain Ibrahim Traoré arrived without warning. No convoy, no entourage. Just him, dressed in fatigues, boots still dusty from patrol. He stood at the crash site, the twisted metal still smoking. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. But his eyes stayed fixed on one small, scorched object lying near the wreckage. A sealed folder, burnt at the edges. But inside, names still readable. He picked it up, turned to General Kawanda. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were trying to destroy. A long pause. Find out who sent that signal and stop them before the next name is mine. At precisely 1:42 a.m., a surveillance operator at Burkina Faso's Cyber Intelligence Center leaned back from his monitor and frowned. The wiretap unit had been scanning open radio frequencies near the southern border, a routine sweep targeting smuggler chatter and rogue militia noise. But this wasn't random. It came through clear, encrypted, but not clean enough. A male voice speaking softly in a mix of French and Dioula. Phase 1 complete. Bird is down. Proceed to fall back. Await green light for Phase 2. Static followed, then silence. The operator blinked, not just because of what he heard, but because of who he recognized. The voice wasn't confirmed, but he'd heard that tone before. Calm, confident, almost smug. A voice from old footage during the 2011 Ivorian crisis. A name surfaced in his memory like a slow poison. Bassi Matu. Protocol dictated he report up the chain. But this was beyond protocol. Within minutes, the clip was isolated, enhanced, decrypted, tagged. 30 seconds later, it was transmitted via secure channel to one man and one man only, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. At 2 a.m., the encrypted alert buzzed on a rugged black satellite phone resting beside a mug of untouched bitter tea. Traoré, still in uniform, was seated alone in a dimly lit observation room overlooking a wall of surveillance feeds. He didn't flinch when the message came in. He tapped it open, leaned forward, and hit play. The voice spilled into the room, steady and deliberate. Phase 1 complete. Traoré didn't move. His face was unreadable, carved in stone. But in his eyes, a flicker, sharp, calculating. He listened twice, 3 times, then tapped the phone off and stood up slowly. Phase 1. That meant the crash wasn't just an act of terror, it was a coordinated step, which meant there was a Phase 2, which meant someone wasn't done yet. He stepped into the hallway. The building was silent but alive. Even at this hour, the Defense Command Center ticked like a war machine. He walked past sleeping aides, analysts slumped over terminals, security guards nodding silently. No one dared speak as he passed. They felt it. Something had shifted. Traoré entered the operations briefing room without knocking. Inside, General Kawanda was already reviewing satellite feeds of the crash zone. His bloodshot eyes looked up as Traoré entered. It wasn't an accident, Traoré said, voice low. Kawanda didn't respond at first, then nodded. I know. Traoré handed him the satellite phone. Listen to this. Kawanda put the device to his ear. The room went silent again, save for the ghostly echo of that single phrase. Phase 1 complete. When it ended, Kawanda let out a slow exhale. They're speaking in military ops code. Whoever it is, they've been trained. This wasn't some rogue militia. No, Traoré agreed. This was someone with command experience, with budget, with reach. He paused, then added, and with connections across the border. Kawanda's eyes narrowed. Ivory Coast. No confirmation came, but it wasn't needed. Traoré walked to the operations table and pointed to a digital map. Pull intel on Ataku Bay. We've had whispers for months, nothing solid. But now, the technician zoomed in on the area. A former militia zone turned residential redevelopment project on paper. But reports had quietly surfaced of unregistered traffic, satellite dish interference, encrypted cross-border calls. No one had connected it until now. They're preparing something, Traoré muttered, and they think we're still blind. He turned to Kawanda, this time not as commander, but as comrade. We've got a window, a small one, before Phase 2 hits. Kawanda nodded, eyes steeling. Then let's make it count. As Traoré left the room, the voice from the recording echoed in his head like a drumbeat in a dark tunnel. He knew what this meant. It was no longer about defense. This was a message, a warning, and a challenge. They had made their move. Now it was his turn. The room was windowless, thick with tension and recycled air. A single overhead projector hummed softly, casting a flickering map of Abidjan onto the concrete wall. Red pins dotted several districts, communications towers, former militia bases, foreign embassies, but one pin glowed brighter than the rest. Ataku Bay. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood at the far end of the room, arms crossed, watching as his top intelligence analyst stepped forward. The man's voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly as he clicked to the next slide. "This," he said, "is not an ordinary civilian compound. It's a former rebel stronghold from the Ivorian Civil War. We've monitored it quietly for 6 months. Encrypted comms, irregular power usage, late-night drops from unmarked trucks. But we never had enough to confirm it was operational. Until now." He clicked again. A grainy satellite image appeared. Ataku Bay by night. Heat signatures revealed movement inside the old compound. Armed men pacing in formation, military-grade equipment being offloaded under tarpaulins, and a helipad recently refurbished. In the corner of the image, a vehicle was caught just before entering the garage. Zoomed in, the license plate was blurred, but the model, a matte black SUV with diplomatic modifications, was unmistakable. "This," the analyst continued, "matches a convoy pattern tied to the Office of Internal Security in Côte d'Ivoire, which means this site is not rogue. It's being protected at the highest level." There was a pause. No one in the room breathed. Traoré stepped forward now, his boots echoing against the concrete floor. He studied the image in silence, then pointed at a figure caught mid-frame on the surveillance still. A man in a tan overcoat, partially masked by shadow. "Zoom in," he said. The analyst hesitated. "We've tried. Too blurry, but facial metrics came close to one match from our archive." He pulled up a dated personnel file. The image on the screen was younger, sharper, but the jawline, the scar above the eyebrow, the eyes, unmistakable. "Bassi Matu," the analyst said quietly. "Former Burkinabe field officer, Intelligence Division, discharged 6 years ago for unauthorized cross-border operations. Vanished soon after. No trace until now." The room fell even quieter, if that was possible. A few exchanged looks. Some recognized the name immediately. Others didn't, but felt the weight of it all the same. Traoré's eyes locked on the screen. He spoke almost to himself. "I know him." A beat passed, then another. Kawanda broke the silence. "He trained under you, didn't he?" Traoré didn't answer right away. He didn't have to. The answer was in the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes darkened. Not with fear, but something far colder. "He was sharp," Traoré finally said. "Quick, too ambitious for his own good. Always asked what the real game was behind orders. I thought he wanted to understand. Turns out he wanted to control it." He turned away from the screen, voice lower now. "He's not just running ops from across the border. He's writing the script. That means whatever's coming next, he's orchestrating it." The lights dimmed as the projector shut off. No one moved. There were no more slides. No more guesses. They had a location. They had a face. And they had a name. The enemy had just become real. The smell of red clay after the first Sahel rain still lingered in the courtyard of Burkina Faso's military academy the day Bassi Matu graduated top of his class. In the cadet photo, his posture was perfect. Chin up, eyes fixed on a horizon no one else seemed to see. Even then, instructors whispered that the young intelligence officer could read a map like a poem and dismantle a radio in 30 seconds flat. He spent evenings in the dusty library poring over declassified coup dossiers from Latin America and Southeast Asia, circling passages, scribbling theories about how small states bend under the weight of bigger ones. He told classmates change was just a matter of leverage, and when they laughed, thinking he meant guns, he shook his head and tapped the side of his temple. Information is heavier than bullets. His first deployment was a border security project funded jointly by the Ministry of Defense and a European Development Agency. The task seemed simple: help villagers register land to prevent extremist recruitment, but Bassi noticed an odd pattern. NGO trucks arrived with aid by day, but at night the same drivers held quiet meetings with local chiefs, collecting economic data that had nothing to do with soil or seeds. He filed a report. It disappeared. The next week, a polite Frenchman in a linen suit appeared at the outpost with a gift: 2 satellite phones for emergencies and a business card stamped Fondation Horizons Nouveau. Over lukewarm instant coffee, the visitor listened to Basie's frustration about bureaucratic inertia and repeated the line that would echo for years. "You want to change your country? Let us help." Officially, the foundation offered mid-career scholarships. Unofficially, it curated talent, young officers with restless intelligence and mild disillusionment. The scholarship whisked Basie to a policy institute in Brussels for a 4-week strategic leadership forum. It was there, over late-night cigars in a private club off Avenue Louise, that he met consultants who spoke of regional realignment the way traders discuss commodity futures. They praised his questions, invited him to weekend retreats, paid for his hotel upgrades. One mentor, a retired diplomat named Vandermeer, slid a thin folder across a walnut desk: case studies on how aligning with the right partners could accelerate a soldier's career beyond the slow grind of national hierarchies. Basie noted the footnotes. Every success story ended with a discreet LLC in Delaware and an embossed seal from a security contractor. Returning to Ouagadougou, he found his promotion papers already waiting. He also found himself copied on emails about donor-funded community resilience labs near resource corridors, labs whose budgets dwarfed entire army regiments. He began arranging site security, then signing off on equipment imports, then quietly revising route clearances so unmarked convoys could cross at night without customs interference. Each small favor earned a nod from someone higher, someplace farther away. His bank balance, once a soldier's pittance, started reflecting generous consulting fees in crisp CFA deposits. The shift was gradual enough that colleagues saw only the surface: the nicer wristwatch, the casual mention of weekend seminars in Abidjan, the new fluency and talking points about public-private synergy. Yet inside, something fundamental had pivoted. Basie no longer saluted the flag so much as he saluted momentum, the exhilarating sense that he was now a node in a larger, humming network. At quiet dinners he hosted for select officers, he spoke of sovereignty as a negotiation, not a right, and poured Bordeaux while quoting Machiavelli. "He who controls information controls destiny." Some nodded, others squirmed, all left sensing he was moving faster than the institution built to contain him. When disciplinary auditors finally questioned a missing shipment of night vision goggles that had rerouted to Côte d'Ivoire, Basie greeted them with impeccable paperwork and a calm grin. The report was buried, the auditors were reassigned. Within a month, he accepted a secondment to an Ivorian counter-terror liaison unit, backed by a French security think tank. Official farewell photos show him shaking hands with a defense attaché, but the more revealing moment happened off-camera. Vandermeer slipping him a sealed envelope, murmuring, "From now on, you'll answer to progress, not passports." That night, as his outbound plane leveled above the Gulf of Guinea, Basie gazed at the quilt of village fires flickering against the darkness below. He thought of the academy courtyard, of oaths sworn beneath a fading flag, and felt no guilt. In his mind, loyalties were instruments, tuned, tightened, or replaced to play a grander composition. Somewhere deep in the overhead bin lay a crisp contract guaranteeing triple-digit bonuses for field facilitation. His final signature still fresh in blue ink. Basie closed his eyes, rehearsing the future he now believed he owned, unaware that every step was being logged, every favor filed, and every ambition noted by those who considered him useful. For now. In the heart of Abidjan's diplomatic quarter, tucked between a crumbling bookstore and a flower shop that hadn't seen fresh orchids in weeks, there sat a modest 3-story building with no nameplate and tinted windows that never opened. Inside, on the top floor, behind triple reinforced doors and layers of signal jammers, Basie Matu ran what could only be described as a war room without uniforms. The apartment was silent but alive. Walls lined with fiberboard concealed monitors, hard drives, and encrypted rotors. An old teakwood table sat in the center, covered not with dinnerware, but with satellite printouts, flight manifests, and stacks of untraceable cash. On the far wall, a digital map of Burkina Faso flickered softly, color-coded overlays indicating troop movements, civilian patrols, and weak points in regional command. Dots blinked with eerie precision, each one tagged, contacted, paid, pending. Basie sat barefoot on a low-leather chair, fingers gliding across a tablet. He had just approved a second wave of payments, transfers routed through layered shell companies in Togo, then rerouted through construction firms in the Emirates before landing in local crypto wallets. Everything moved in silence. Everything looked legitimate, and nothing bore his name. He didn't speak often to subordinates. Most were ex-military, now freelance. He preferred voice filters, text chains, and dead drops. But tonight, he made an exception. A voice buzzed through the secure communication line. Abdul confirmed the southern corridor is clear. Fighters will cross within 48 hours. One complication, the commander asked for an extra 25 million. Basie didn't hesitate. Approve it. Push it through the Dakar channel. Double blind. Then he paused. He glanced at the far right screen, where a name pulsed red on the upper edge of the display. Gabriel Bissolet. Basie leaned forward, tone dropping. Tell the commander the funds were authorized personally by Monsieur B. Silence on the line. Then a quiet reply. Understood. Basie hung up. He stared at the name glowing in red. Not a contact, not a colleague, but a ghost. There were no photos of Gabriel Bissolet in any known database. No passport, no company registration, not even a reliable age. Yet his name came up at oil conferences in Nigeria, at arms expos in Dubai, in secret court filings from Bangui to Brussels. When he spoke, generals listened. When he moved money, governments trembled. And when he chose a pawn, that pawn rose. That's what Basie had become. He remembered the first time he heard the name whispered, in Brussels during the final dinner of his leadership forum. A man in a dark suit leaned in close and asked, "Do you want access to change, or just proximity to power?" Basie had said both. The man smiled. Then someone will contact you. His name is Bissolet. You don't find him. He finds you. And he did. Through a courier, in an envelope, with an unlisted phone and a single line. Your country will thank you when you remove the obstacles to its potential. That had been 3 years ago. Since then, Basie had moved money across 5 countries, built a network of mercenaries from 4 continents, and co-opted at least a dozen Burkinabe officers. The latest transfer, 24 billion CFA francs, came coded in 6 tranches, each marked by a different symbol. He'd cracked the sequence within minutes. The money wasn't just for sabotage, it was for systemic disruption. Fund media campaigns, smear the Traoré administration, bribe tribal elders, even sponsor youth dialogue programs that secretly trained destabilization cells. He leaned back, eyes fixed on the blinking map. The blue lines representing Traoré's patrols were slowly being surrounded by orange markers. Contractors, double agents, bought loyalty. It looked like a net, and he was the spider in its center. For Basie, this wasn't personal, it was structural. Burkina Faso had chosen the wrong trajectory. He was simply correcting it, with precision, strategy, and no room for sentiment. But deep inside, beneath the layers of calculation, a flicker of something else stirred. Not doubt, but anticipation. He was playing a dangerous game, and he wanted to see if Traoré was as untouchable as everyone claimed. The meeting took place just before midnight, behind the mirrored glass of a private lounge buried 2 floors beneath the presidential palace in Abidjan. The room was soundproof, windowless, scented faintly with cedarwood and cold ambition. No guards were present, no aides, just Alassane Ouattara, seated at a long table of polished mahogany, and Basie Matou, standing silently as if summoned by a monarch, not a president. Ouattara didn't look up immediately. He was reading something, handwritten notes, scribbled in the tight, looping penmanship of an old economist. When he finally glanced up, his eyes didn't match the warm public face broadcast on national television. These eyes were calculating, exhausted, and deeply afraid, though he would never admit that. "Sit," he said flatly. Basie obeyed. For a moment, neither spoke. The air vibrated with unspoken history. Then Ouattara leaned forward, fingers interlocked, voice low but clear. This isn't just about Traoré. Don't be foolish enough to think this is personal. He tapped his fingers once against the wood. This is about legacy, about West Africa not being hijacked by another dreamer with a rifle and a slogan. Basie remained expressionless, letting the silence stretch. Ouattara continued. You know what the real threat is? Not his weapons, not his uniform, not even his army. It's his narrative. He's resurrecting something we buried decades ago. Unity without permission, sovereignty without structure, revolution without leash. He looked away, almost to himself now. We let Sankara speak too long. We let Gaddafi build too wide. And look what it cost. You think France will sit idle this time? The Americans? The Emiratis? No. Traoré is not just another officer. He's a spark. And if that spark catches wind, this whole region goes up in flames we can't control. Basie spoke for the first time, voice calm. He has loyalty. Ouattara smiled, but not kindly. Loyalty fades. Hunger does not. You offer enough bread, enough silence, and men will forget flags. He opened a small box and slid it across the table. Inside, a flash drive. Silver, marked with a symbol, Basie instantly recognized. It was the key to the final stage of their operation. Media infiltration, political blackmail, external military readiness. Basie didn't touch it. Ouattara's voice dropped to a whisper now, like a priest delivering last rites. We cannot allow a Sankara 2.0. Not this time. Not when we've spent 30 years rebuilding what he broke. Your job isn't just to dismantle Traoré. It's to dismantle the illusion that he's even possible. Basie leaned back slightly, nodded once. Understood. Ouattara closed the folder in front of him, as if ending a chapter. His expression softened, just enough to resemble the old statesman again. You will be remembered for this, Basie. History always forgets the quiet men who prevent chaos. As Basie stood and walked toward the exit, he paused at the door, fingers grazing the flash drive in his pocket. In another time, in another uniform, he might have saluted. Tonight he didn't. He simply vanished into the silence, carrying with him the weight of an order not written on paper, but carved into the future of a continent already bleeding between its borders. The raid came at 2:53 a.m., swift, silent, surgical. No sirens, no warning. Just a blackout in the building's east wing, followed by the rhythmic hiss of boots moving through tight corridors. 4 members of Traoré's elite shadow unit breached Bassi Matou's temporary apartment in Ouagadougou, hidden above an abandoned tailor's shop on Rue des Sables. They didn't expect resistance, and got none. The place was empty, still warm, coffee mug half full, a laptop open, screensaver still running. Whoever had been there had left only minutes earlier, but they didn't leave clean. On the corner of the nightstand, next to a leather wallet and an old military badge, lay a phone, sleek, black, slightly scuffed. At first glance, nothing unusual, but to trained eyes it was something else entirely. Custom-built, military-grade encryption, air-gapped, no SIM. Most would have assumed it wiped automatically the second Basie left, but Traoré's men didn't assume. They had orders. Bag it. Priority 1. By 4:15 a.m., the phone was inside the cyber recon lab beneath the Ministry of Security. The room was cold, clinical, lit by white-blue glow. 3 techs surrounded the device like surgeons around a heart. They didn't ask what it was or whose it was. They only asked what it was hiding. The first firewall dropped after 23 minutes, an improvised biometric loop designed to reject even cloned fingerprints. The second layer was harder, a cascading fail-safe that wiped directories if the wrong pattern was guessed twice. On the third attempt, they got in, not because they guessed, but because Basie had left something behind. A small error, a misnamed file deep inside the image cache. It pointed to a hidden directory. That, in turn, led to a cloned vault hidden under a music folder labeled Live Afro Mix 2019. What they found inside wasn't just damning. It was explosive. Names, coordinates, payslips, foreign accounts, ID scans of mercenaries from France, Australia, South Africa, logs of encrypted calls between Basie and known associates in the Ivorian Intelligence Directorate. Even scanned passports showing aliases tied to recent cross-border entries. But that wasn't all. There were floor plans, military compounds, media stations, VIP residences, each marked with colored tags: infiltrated, pending, cleared. One folder, titled simply VDP, contained recorded conversations with civilian defense volunteers, some bribed, others threatened, some wavering. And finally, in a nested document under the name Phase 3 Akimbo, a full operation breakdown. Dates, targets, media campaigns, and psychological warfare strategies to portray Traoré as a power-hungry warlord. At 5:22 a.m., the lead analyst called the command room. His voice didn't shake, but his throat was dry. "We have it," he said. "All of it." Captain Traoré arrived 20 minutes later. He walked into the lab without speaking, nodded once, and stood as they displayed the files on the projector screen. His face didn't betray emotion, but his silence spoke volumes. He read names of people he had trained beside. He saw payment trails leading to once trusted officers. He saw photos of Burkinabe informants posing with foreign handlers. And when he reached the audio file labeled "From Bisolet, top line only," he paused. The message was short, just 9 words. "The collapse of Traoré means the collapse of AES." He looked at the text. "Print everything. Isolate priority targets. Secure every name on that list. Anyone not on our side by dawn is on theirs." They nodded, already moving. As Traoré turned to leave, he passed by the table where the phone still sat, now powered down, inert. Just a hunk of glass and circuitry again. But it had spoken, and what it said could no longer be buried. He didn't say a word on his way out, but everyone in the room understood. The game had changed. The fog had cleared. The enemy was no longer an idea, a rumor, a shadow. He had names, and now he had purpose. By the time the sun rose over Ouagadougou, a war room had been constructed inside the presidential bunker, converted from what used to be a wine cellar during colonial times. The stone walls still held the chill of forgotten French vintages, but the air now pulsed with urgency and the quiet fury of preparation. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood before a 6-meter digital map that had replaced the old colonial crest. Dots and threads covered the screen like a nervous system. This was the anatomy of betrayal. "Start with the foreign assets," he ordered. One of the analysts, young, sharp, barely 30, zoomed in on a marked sector in southern Mali. "Confirmed presence of Australian private contractors operating under the guise of agricultural advisors, registered to a shell company based in Dubai. Last week, they crossed into the Gao region with equipment that included drone jammers, encrypted radios, and satellite-guided mortars." Traoré nodded. Next, the map shifted west to a facility on the outskirts of Korhogo, northern Côte d'Ivoire. 4 confirmed French ex-commandos, the analyst continued, formerly attached to Operation Barkhane, officially retired, unofficially subcontracted to a Paris-based security firm that's been under investigation since Libya. Who's paying them? Funds traced back to an energy investment trust in Geneva. Same trust has links to companies involved in uranium extraction, Burkina Faso's uranium. Traoré's gaze darkened, but he said nothing. Another tap. A red icon blinked near the tri-border zone where Burkina Faso, Niger, and Côte d'Ivoire nearly kissed. "This is where it gets deeper," the analyst said. "Satellite confirms delivery of 5 fourth-generation fighter jets to a private airfield outside Bouaka. Jets bear no national insignia. Pilots likely Eastern European, trained under Ivorian contracts. Who authorized the airspace? Ivorian Defense Minister, sealed executive order. Off the books. We intercepted an encrypted log indicating the jets are assigned to rapid deterrent scenarios." Traoré spoke now, his voice low and deliberate. "They're not deterrence, they're insurance. Air superiority for a ground incursion." But it wasn't the jets or the mercenaries that made him step away from the screen. It was a folder, paper, not digital, resting quietly in a brown file marked VDP, the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland, civilians trained to protect their villages when the military was stretched thin. Men with rusty rifles, old boots, and hearts that beat louder than any formal oath. Men Traoré had visited, eaten with, buried the dead beside. Men who had become the spine of the country's resistance. Now they were targets. Inside the folder, audio transcripts, bank logs, call summaries. Dozens of VDP units across the southern and eastern zones had been contacted, promised money, medicine, safety for their families. Some had refused, others had gone silent. A few had already crossed. He scanned one transcript in particular. "You don't need to fight for a man who can't guarantee your child's future. We can. Think of your village. Think of your daughter." Traoré closed the file slowly, fingers tight around the edges. "This is the real battlefield," he said. "Not the airstrips, not the command posts. This." He turned to the room, voice rising slightly. Not in volume, but in weight. "They want to turn the soul of the nation against itself, not with bombs, but with offers, not by force, but by persuasion." He stepped back to the map, tapped 3 zones in succession, border towns known for resistance. "Send trusted officers, meet with the VDP leaders personally, not by phone, not by message, eye to eye. Remind them who they fight for, and why." The room moved quickly, orders flying, laptops snapping open. But Traoré remained still for a moment longer, because the deeper he looked into the web, the more he realized it wasn't built to kill him. It was built to unravel a country, thread by thread. General Coincidental had fought in more wars than he cared to remember. He had marched through forests where malaria killed faster than bullets, slept in trenches soaked with red Sahel dust, and buried more comrades than he had fingers to count. But nothing prepared him for the moment when betrayal came not from the barrel of a gun, but in the form of a briefcase. It was late, just past 11 p.m. when the courier arrived, polished, polite, speaking French with a coastal accent. He handed Coincidental a sealed envelope, bowed slightly and left without asking for tea or conversation. That alone told Coincidental this wasn't official. Inside the envelope, a numbered account key, offshore, untraceable. A second sheet contained a single line. $2 million. In return, 1 silence, 1 delay, 1 unlocked door. No threats, no coercion, just a proposition. Coincidental stared at it under the yellow light of his study. Outside, the capital murmured in the distance, generators humming, horns echoing through the sleepless night. He folded the note carefully, walked to the safe, placed it inside and locked it. Then he sat and remembered. It was the dry season 2009. He was just a field captain then, deep in the north, pinned down by a rebel group funded by who knew who. Supplies were low, morale was lower. One morning a boy, no older than 8, approached the camp barefoot, carrying a tin plate of rice and goat meat. He offered it without a word, eyes wide, arms shaking. Coincidental tried to send him back, fearing snipers, but the boy refused. "You protect my mother," he whispered. "I protect you." Coincidental never saw him again, but he remembered the look in the boy's eyes. Not fear, not pride, belief. That memory returned now, stronger than the weight of the bribe. By dawn, Coincidental arrived at Traoré's office with the envelope, untouched. He placed it on the desk. Traoré raised an eyebrow. "New delivery?" Coincidental's voice was steady. "They offered me $2 million to betray you, to betray everything. I brought it here instead." Traoré didn't speak at first. He studied his old friend, saw the lines on his face that war and burden had carved. Then he opened the envelope, scanned the offer, and let out the faintest exhale. "Why not take it?" he asked quietly. Coincidental smiled. It wasn't warm. "Because I don't forget who I serve, and my soul's not for sale." He paused, then added, "Let them throw money. Let them promise the world, but they'll never buy conviction. Not mine." Traoré stood and extended his hand. Coincidental shook it, firm, unflinching. 2 soldiers who had bled on the same ground, now standing against something far more dangerous than bullets. Doubt. That evening, the safe house of the courier was raided. Inside, dozens of similar envelopes, each addressed to other officers. Some already gone, some still weighing their price. But by reporting it first, Coincidental lit a signal fire. Across the ranks, whispers turned into vows. A quiet ripple of loyalty began to spread, not born from fear or fame, but from the example of one man who chose honor over wealth, And in a war where lines blurred and loyalty was currency, that choice was louder than any battle cry. The convoy crawled along a cracked dirt road that threaded the savannah like an old scar, dust plumes rising behind each armored truck and drifting back over the dry acacia trees. Captain Ibrahim Traoré rode in the lead vehicle, one gloved hand resting on the open window, eyes fixed on the horizon where a cluster of termite-mounded ruins poked through pale grass. They called the place Camp Maréchal, but the maps no longer bothered to name it. After the French withdrawal of '89 and the rebel training surge of the early 2000s, it had become a ghost sewn to the border. Half in Burkina Faso, half in no man's land. It was also the last spot his father had ever been seen alive. The trucks halted at a fallen checkpoint gate. Sun-bleached French signage still clung to the rusted post. Interdit, zone militaire. Traoré stepped out, boots sinking into sand so fine it sang. No birds, no wind. Just the deep hush of a place that remembered violence and, like a wounded animal, stayed silent to avoid more. A young lieutenant named Ouattara approached, saluted. "Perimeter secure, sir. No hostiles detected. Yet." Traoré nodded but kept walking, past half-collapsed barracks whose sheet metal roofs curled like dead leaves, past the firing range where weeds sprouted through pitted concrete. Memories seeped up from the ground, stories his mother told of his father bivouacked here in '89, tasked to monitor French advisors who were merely teaching logistics, though everyone knew they were shaping insurgents who would later burn villages for loyalty contracts. The elder Traoré questioned the mission's purpose, filed a complaint, and vanished 2 nights after. Officially, lost in action. Unofficially, a warning to other officers who let conscience outrank orders. A gutted operations bunker crouched at the edge of the camp, its entryway a jagged mouth. Traoré ducked inside. The air was cooler, thick with mold and bat droppings. Flashlight beams revealed faded chalk lines on a wall map, the old Sahel transit arteries, and French acronyms for supply drops. LZ Alpha, LZ Bravo. Someone had tried to scrub them, but the ghost of each coordinate still clung. He ran a finger over the spot marked Rivière Colibo, where his father's unit last radioed for extraction. The dust left a gray streak across his glove. Footsteps echoed behind him. Sergeant Bolo, a veteran who'd fought beside him in the 2015 border clashes, entered carrying a cracked hard plastic crate. "Sir, found this buried under collapsed roofing. French field rations, expiration 2001. Empty but fresh footprints around it." He placed the crate down. "Not ours." Outside, the lieutenant called, "Captain, you'll want to see this." Traoré emerged into hot light. Beyond the northern fence, fresh tire grooves cut through soil that hadn't carried vehicles in years. Nearby, spent shell casings glinted. NATO grade, recent manufacture. He knelt, picked one up, read the stamped year, 2025. Yesterday's war returning with today's date. He stood, gaze sweeping the horizon. To the west, dust clouds hinted at livestock, or perhaps something less innocent. Intelligence had reported clandestine supply convoys hugging the border at dusk, trucks with Ivorian plates switching to blank panels once off main roads. Now the evidence sat in his palm. That was when an older corporal, face sun-creased, approached and spoke as if confessing to a ghost. "They've returned, sir," he said, voice hoarse. "Only the flag has changed." Traoré closed his hand around the casing, feeling the sharp rim bite into his skin. Images overlapped. His father's platoon under foreign command. Today's mercenaries under a different logo. The same soil drinking the same blood. History unburied, wearing a new uniform. He turned to his officers. "Document everything. Shells, footprints, tire depth, satellite coordinates. I want a forensic sweep, and post recon teams along the ridge. If they're crossing here, I want to greet them properly." The men dispersed. Traoré remained, staring at the broken perimeter fence fluttering with an old tricolor scrap. He tore the fabric free, folded it once, slid it into his pocket, not as a trophy, but as proof. Proof that the old masters still believed Burkina's destiny was theirs to draft, that rebellions could be outsourced, that ghosts could be weaponized. He whispered almost to the wind, "Not this time." Behind him, the camp's shadows seemed to breathe, but for the first moment in decades, they didn't feel abandoned. They felt watched by a son who had come not to mourn, but to dismantle the past before it could kill the future. They moved like shadows, silent, precise, and familiar with the soil beneath their boots. No insignia, no flags, no uniforms recognizable to any national registry. Just local cloth, desert scarves, the kind of weather-worn gear common to any West African militia. But their posture gave them away. Not what they wore, but how they carried the weight. By the time Traoré's internal unit picked up the trail, they had already been inside Burkina Faso for weeks. Not a full unit, just 5 men, operating independently, traveling in pairs or solo, never using the same route twice. But their footprint was too clean, too calculated. These weren't ordinary mercenaries. These were trained commandos, French-born, former Foreign Legion, some with active service in Mali and Niger during Operation Barkhane. Their cover was airtight. They spoke fluent Fulfulde and more, used regional slang convincingly, and avoided populated areas except when absolutely necessary. One posed as a traveling animal trader, another as a school teacher volunteering at a rural madrasa. But it was their intel that alarmed Traoré the most. They knew the terrain better than some of his own officers. They navigated unmarked forest paths, accessed dry riverbeds that only locals would remember, and tapped into communication frequencies used only during internal civil defense drills. At first, there was no confirmed objective. Then the signal came. A tribal leader in the eastern province of Gourma, Chief Alidou Zabré, one of the first elders to publicly support Traoré's transition and rally his region's VDP units, had gone missing. His security detail reported a false medical evacuation call the night before. By the time they realized it was a decoy, the chief's convoy had already diverted. It was last seen entering a narrow gorge known as Col des Vautours, Vulture's Pass. A body was found 48 hours later, strangled, no bullet wound, no struggle, just precision, not robbery, elimination. The forensic team retrieved a communication earpiece buried under loose gravel near the site. French-made, military-grade, audio log partially intact. A voice, calm, controlled, European accent, saying, "Target neutralized, moving to phase 2. The message was enough. Traoré didn't need more confirmation. They weren't just destabilizing from across the border anymore. They were inside, operating with surgical precision, removing his support structure, elder by elder, village by village. He called an emergency intelligence council that evening. "Ghosts are walking among us," he said, his voice not loud but sharp. "They look like us. They speak like us. But they answer to money, not to country." He tapped the digital map showing layered movement in the Gourma region. They didn't choose Zabré because he was loud. They chose him because he was consistent, because people believed him. The room fell into heavy silence. Everyone understood the message. This was psychological warfare. The goal wasn't just to kill, but to instill fear, to suggest that no one, not even the elders, were safe under Traoré's protection. A minister finally spoke. "We can reinforce security around other tribal leaders." "No," Traoré said. "That's what they want, to force us into bunkers while they roam free." He looked at his commanders. "Find them. Not just the French operatives, the ones who house them, guide them, protect them. This isn't just foreign infiltration. It's local complicity. They're blending in because someone here is holding the door open." Outside, the wind had picked up. Dust howled across the city's edge like the old spirits returning for reckoning. As Traoré stepped out of the bunker that night, he thought not of borders or battlefields, but of a truth more chilling. The enemy no longer came with tanks or flags. They came as neighbors, as traitors, as helpers. They came wearing the face of trust, and they were already inside. The smoke could be seen 10 kilometers out, rising like a crooked pillar into the orange dusk. It wasn't the dry season brush burning. This smoke was heavier, blacker, thick with oil and ruin. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré stepped out of the chopper, the heat hit him like a furnace. The village of Namabu was still smoldering. Entire rows of homes lay in charred heaps, tin roofs curled like dying leaves. Livestock wandered dazed through the ashes. The air reeked of burnt cloth, scorched millet, and something far worse, human flesh. Soldiers had already begun sweeping the perimeter. The attackers were long gone, but their footprints remained in the twisted shell casings, the scorch marks from incendiary grenades, the precise placement of blast points that only trained operatives would understand. This wasn't a tribal clash. This wasn't random banditry. This was a coordinated military strike, executed with chilling efficiency and then erased just enough to look like chaos. Traoré walked among the ruins, face unreadable, jaw tight. Children huddled under a tree, soot streaking their skin like war paint. A woman, barefoot and trembling, emerged from what used to be the market stall. Her eyes found him, not as a politician, not as a soldier, but as a question. "You said we were protected." Before he could answer, a man approached, limping. Blood dried into the collar of his tunic. His voice rasped from smoke. "They wore our uniform," he said, "but their tongues betrayed them." Traoré turned. "What did they say?" One shouted orders, in French, not the kind we speak here. His accent was wrong, coastal, Parisian. He paused, wiped his mouth with the back of a shaking hand. He called the village La Distraction, the distraction. A medic handed Traoré a recovered radio unit, military issue, encrypted, still functional. It had been left behind, tucked into the pocket of a corpse wearing Burkinabe fatigues. But the dead man had no ID, no registration in any military database, and no tribal markings. His gear was immaculate, too immaculate. Imported boots, European stitching, and a patch sewn slightly too low on the shoulder, just enough to fool from a distance. Inside the command tent, Traoré reviewed the casualty list. 12 dead, including 3 elders, 2 VDP volunteers, and a girl no older than 8. Another name stood out on a separate list handed to him minutes later. The suspected commander of the raid, identified by witness sketch and cross-checked from the seized phone data. Jacques Lemaitre, former French Foreign Legion, contracted under Bissolet's network, already flagged on Basie's internal roster. The pieces clicked together like teeth on a trigger. Traoré stood in the center of the tent, flanked by silence. "This is no longer infiltration," he said. "This is declaration." No one spoke. He turned slowly, holding up the sketch of Lemaitre. "This man burned a village to test our response, to send a message that they can wear our face, speak our tongue, and kill our people with impunity." He stepped outside into the smoke-heavy dusk. His boots crunched over broken pottery and blackened bone. The wind shifted. Ash blew across his chest like falling snow. He looked at the horizon, the same direction the attackers had fled. "This is war now." It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a speech. It was a fact. The fire hadn't lied, and from its ruins, the next phase of the struggle had already begun. It started in the hum of newsroom fluorescent lights, not on the battlefield. In Abidjan, an editor at Le Continent Nouveau arrived to find a slim man in a gray suit waiting at her desk. He wasn't on the schedule, yet he handed her a flash drive, 3 glossy photos, and a contract worth 5 times her annual salary. The request was simple: publish an exclusive about Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Brand him a warlord who recruits child soldiers and murders tribal elders under the guise of security. No proof needed, only urgency. The money trail looked charitable, a media development grant routed through a Lagos nonprofit. But at the top of the pyramid sat Bassi Matu, watching from his fortified apartment as the first headline went live. Within hours, the story radiated across Francophone Africa. Syndicated outlets picked it up. Talk radio hosts framed it as breaking news. Bloggers embellished it with shaky phone videos from unrelated conflicts. Basie's operation was methodical. $50,000 to a regional TV anchor in Dakar for a primetime segment. $20,000 to a Ghanaian influencer with 2 million followers. Small stipends to stringers in Ouattara and Bobo Dioulasso to provide local color. The disinformation packets had been written weeks earlier, complete with fake witness testimonies, doctored UN memos, and grainy images of guerrilla camps from the 1990s. All that remained was to hit send, then watch as algorithms carried them farther than any convoy of mercenaries could travel. Basie monitored real-time analytics on a tiled wall of screens, hashtags spiking, Hashtag Traoré the Tyrant, hashtag Save Burkina, hashtag Child Soldier Crisis. Color-coded heat maps showing engagement densities in Abidjan, Yamoussoukro, Bouaké. He sipped espresso while a data analyst informed him that Facebook engagement from Ivory Coast had doubled in just 4 hours. He smirked. People believe what confirms their fear, he said, tapping a chart that showed trust in military governments plunging with every refreshed page. Meanwhile, in a makeshift media room in Ouagadougou, Traoré's communication officers scrambled. They filmed testimonials from villagers praising the VDP, released photos of rebuilt clinics, circulated raw data on school enrollment, all of it drowned in the avalanche of sensational claims. International correspondents, wary of losing access to Ivorian state officials, echoed the controversy, floating questions they framed as impartial. Is Burkina Faso turning into the next failed state? Satellite news crawls began pairing Traoré's name with phrases like child militia and self-styled strongman. Across Ivory Coast, the narrative hardened. In a busy Abidjan cafe, a retired teacher scrolled her phone. She's starving her own people, she told her neighbor, pointing at an image of malnourished children lifted from a completely different province. A taxi driver chimed in. They say he's training kids with AK-47s. Seen the photos? Terrible. The lie didn't need to win every heart, only to shift the center of gravity. By painting Traoré as a monster, Ouattara's government could justify any future regional intervention as humanitarian. Bassi's team understood psychology as well as politics. They inserted smaller, more believable rumors between the grotesque ones. Whispers that Traoré was seizing farmland, that VDP volunteers were extorting grain, that military convoys were blocking medical supplies. Each lie made the next more plausible. Trusted local radio hosts repeated them at dawn when farmers tuned in, while church bulletins carried veiled prayer requests for victims of northern tyranny. In chat groups, fabricated screenshots of Traoré ordering mass arrests spread like wildfire. Attempts to debunk them were branded as propaganda, proof that the regime feared the truth. Inside the presidential bunker, Traoré reviewed a stack of foreign editorials condemning him. He recognized recycled vocabulary, kleptocratic junta, erratic strongman, imminent genocide, words once hurled at Sankara, at Lumumba, at Gaddafi before the bombs fell. He placed the papers down slowly. If they cannot defeat us with bullets, he murmured to Kawanda, they will try with belief. Back in Abidjan, Bassi received a secure call. A filtered voice, Bissolet's, commended the surge in negative sentiment. Perception precedes permission. Keep feeding the narrative. The sky will open for Phase 4. Bassi ended the call, feeling the hum of power in his fingertips. No gunfire, no smoke, just a digital quill rewriting reality in real time. He looked again at the trending feed, a composite image of Traoré in dark glasses beside burning huts, captioned "The Butcher of the Sahel." It had already been shared 40,000 times within Côte d'Ivoire alone. Outside his window, the city lights glittered like distant fires, proof that sometimes the most effective arson burns in the mind. And somewhere beyond those lights, in a village still grieving ash and bone, the real flames waited to be forgotten beneath the weight of manufactured outrage. For Bassi, that erasure was victory. For Traoré, it was the signal that the next battle would not be fought with rifles, but with the fragile truth itself. The email arrived just after midnight, tucked inside an encrypted message routed through 4 anonymous servers. The subject line was simple: proof of lies. At first, the independent journalists at Radio Vérité, a small digital broadcast station in Ouagadougou, thought it was spam or bait. But when lead editor Aminata Keita opened the file, her hands trembled. Inside were PDFs, screenshots, audio recordings, hundreds of them. Memos between Ivorian officials and paid media contractors. Wire transfers labeled public sentiment shaping. Detailed scripts for broadcasts never aired on state channels, each designed to smear Ibrahim Traoré. One folder was titled Opération Brouillard, Operation Fog. The evidence was overwhelming. Aminata leaned back in her chair, eyes burning from the screen. For weeks, she and her team had watched the narrative turn against their country, watched neighbors argue over manipulated headlines, seen friends lose faith in Traoré, not because of anything they witnessed, but because of what they were told. This was no longer journalism, this was war. By 3 a.m., the studio was alive with movement. Engineers wired backup streams, producers checked satellite fail-safes. They knew this broadcast would be attacked, jammed, possibly hacked, but they also knew something else. Once the truth entered the bloodstream of the people, it could not be taken back. At 7:05 a.m., they went live. Aminata sat before the camera in a simple white blouse, eyes steady, no drama, no music, just clarity. This morning, we do not bring you opinion. We bring you evidence. One by one, they laid it bare. A recording of Bassi instructing a journalist to include false child soldier images, a forged UN report with mismatched timestamps, a payment receipt from an Ivorian embassy to a Ghanaian news blog. They even played the full audio of a media contractor laughing, "We don't need facts, we just need fear." The stream caught fire. Within 30 minutes, it had been mirrored to a dozen backup sites. Influencers who had once echoed the propaganda began to share clips, adding, "I had no idea." In marketplaces, cafes, village halls, people huddled around phones, radios, projectors. And for the first time in weeks, they weren't asking who to believe. They were asking why they were ever fooled. In Abidjan, the blowback was immediate. Calls flooded into local stations, demanding retractions. Ivorian journalists, some complicit, some merely used, found their names trending with the hashtag We Want Truth. Several went on air to confess under pressure, admitting they'd received content packages through intermediaries. One even tearfully resigned on air, whispering, "I betrayed my people." At the presidential palace in Ivory Coast, panic pulsed through the corridors. Bassi hurled his coffee against the wall. "Find the leak," he snapped, but the damage was done. The digital flood had breached every algorithm, bypassed every firewall. The narrative had shifted, and with it, public perception. Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré watched the broadcast in silence. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. But when Aminata looked directly into the camera and said, "Truth is not a weapon, it is the shield," he turned to General Kawanda beside him and said, "Today, we are not alone." The ripple turned into a wave. A university professor in Dakar canceled his lecture and held a forum. Media as the new colonial tool. Civil society leaders from Niger and Guinea demanded transparency in regional reporting. Young artists painted murals of radios cracking open to reveal chains falling away. In the midst of chaos, a rare thing emerged: clarity. The same people who had believed Traoré was a warlord began asking different questions. Not what has he done, but who made me think it? Not is he guilty, but who benefits if we believe he is? In a time when information had become a weapon, truth was the rebellion, and this time it was fighting back. The shot rang out just before dawn, a single crack on an otherwise quiet street in Bamako. The body was found slumped over a cafe table, notebook still open, pen in hand. The ink had run slightly, smudged by the first drop of blood. Her name was Kadiatou Diallo, 32 years old, mother of one, and one of the few journalists in Mali brave enough to name names. She had gone live the night before, reading from a dossier leaked from inside the Ivorian intelligence office. The broadcast lasted 7 minutes. She named Bassi Matou. She named Bisoleil. She traced the funds, disguised as humanitarian aid, directly to the smearing of Captain Traoré. Then she signed off with her signature phrase, "Truth fears no shadow." Hours later, she was gone. News of her death broke like a bone through the region. Radio stations fell silent in mourning. Independent outlets posted her final words across black banners. Her son, just 9 years old, appeared in a photograph beside her framed press badge. For a moment, it felt like truth itself had taken a bullet. When Ibrahim Traoré heard the news, he didn't speak. He simply rose, removed his beret, and asked for the next flight to Bamako. His advisors hesitated. It was risky, politically and militarily, but he cut them off. "She defended this country more honestly than many in uniform," he said. "I will honor her." 2 days later, under a blistering midday sun, Traoré stood among thousands at Kadiatu's funeral. The crowd spilled from the mosque into the surrounding streets. Journalists from across the Sahel were there, some masked, some weeping, all silent. No podium, no bodyguards flanking him, just Traoré in a plain black suit, carrying a single white rose. When the time came to speak, he stepped forward, not as a head of state, but as a man. "They killed a voice," he said, "but they didn't kill the echo. They think silencing truth ends it. But every drop of blood spilled on this soil grows louder than any broadcast. You may silence voices," he continued, eyes locked with the cameras, "but you can't erase truth written in sacrifice." There was no applause, just stillness, mourning. And then something extraordinary happened. A journalist from Niger stepped forward and placed his recorder at the base of her grave. Another followed. Then a woman from Guinea left her press pass among the flowers. One by one, reporters laid their tools beside the casket, not in surrender, but in tribute, a silent pledge that her work would not die with her. Later that night, Traoré sat by the fire in a secure compound, the rose still in his hand. He looked to Kawanda, who said nothing, only nodded. Traoré spoke quietly, almost to himself. "They fear truth enough to kill for it. That means we're close." Outside, the desert wind carried ash and prayer in equal measure. And somewhere beneath freshly turned soil, a pen still lay beside a fallen notebook, its words unfinished but not forgotten. They checked in as mining consultants, 2 French, 1 Australian, and 1 South African. Their passports were real, their cover stories practiced to the comma. The Azalai Hotel in Ouagadougou, with its polished marble lobby and discreet staff, was the perfect base. Centrally located close to embassies, frequented by expatriates and government contractors, it offered comfort, anonymity, and just enough noise to disappear into. For 3 days, they played the part flawlessly. Suits in the morning, fake appointments with fake ministries. At night, they drank sparingly, kept their heads down. One even tipped the bellboy generously, asking politely about safe districts for real estate investment. But in private, inside room 417, the mission was very different. On the whiteboard, a sketch of the National Military Command Chain, colored pins indicating VDP deployment zones, road choke points, unmapped drone corridors. Their objective was clinical: find vulnerabilities, both physical and human. Look for officers disgruntled with Traoré's leadership. Map weaknesses in communications between the regular army and civilian militias. Pinpoint locations where VDP units had been over-deployed without air support. Infiltration wasn't the endgame. Preparation for decapitation was. On the 3rd night, something broke. Agent Duval, the youngest and most anxious of the group, couldn't sleep. His hands shook as he paced the room. He'd seen too many cameras in the hotel lobby, too many conversations around him that went quiet when he approached. The bar manager asked one too many questions about his mining license. His gut screamed what his mouth couldn't. He stepped into the hallway, pulled out a burner phone, and dialed. "Basie," he whispered, voice barely above the hum of the air vent. "We have a problem. They're on to us." Inside his compound in Abidjan, Basie paused mid-conference. He tilted his head. "Are you certain?" "I don't know. It's a feeling, but it's everywhere." Basie cursed under his breath. He had warned them not to stay more than 72 hours. "You're not there to finish the mission, only to scan the field," he'd said. But their curiosity had stretched too far, too deep, and worse. Burkina Faso's counterintelligence unit had been watching Azalai for weeks. Back in Ouagadougou, a janitor with a mop was not a janitor. He wore earbuds beneath his cap. In the restaurant, the friendly Maître D reported every detail to a secure channel. Even the bellboy who received a generous tip had left a trace of powder on the handle of room 417's door, a compound that glows under infrared scan used to track surface contact patterns. Within minutes of Duval's call, command gave the order: move. At 2:12 a.m., doors burst open in synchronized strikes. Flashbangs disoriented, plastic cuffs restrained, laptops were seized mid-upload. One agent tried to jump from the balcony. He shattered his ankle and screamed for mercy in fluent English. By dawn, the four men sat in an underground facility beneath Ouagadougou, silent under questioning but sweating bullets. No names, no affiliations. But Traoré didn't need their words. He had their phones, their documents, their maps, and above all, their failure. In the debrief, a commander laid out the full operation. They weren't just surveying. They were preparing the theater. These weren't scouts. They were precursors. Traoré nodded, eyes narrowing. They weren't planning to infiltrate, he said. They were planning to end us. And now the game had changed. The knives were no longer in the shadows. They were in the room. At 4:37 a.m., satellite feed confirmed it. A convoy, 30 vehicles strong, had crossed the southwestern border near the forested Korogo corridor. Painted in desert camouflage but not bearing the Burkinabe flag. At its core, 2 armored trucks, retrofitted with mounted machine guns. But the most dangerous element wasn't hardware. It was the mix of personnel inside. Foreign mercenaries, their faces shielded behind tactical goggles and borrowed insignia. Traitorous Burkinabe, soldiers who once took oaths under the red-green gold, but now answered to foreign wallets. And behind them, Ivorian handlers, relaying coded instructions to an unseen satellite uplink. But they weren't slipping in unnoticed. Hours before, intelligence had flagged unusual satellite phone chatter. General Kawanda moved swiftly, deploying 3 rapid response units and a hidden artillery post nestled in the tall grasses near the bush path. Traoré didn't stay behind. He rode at the front of his column, body armor tight, eyes locked ahead, fingers wrapped around the grip of his service rifle. This one, he said quietly to Kawanda, is personal. At 5:02 a.m., the 2 forces met just past the old customs checkpoint at Kafolo. There were no negotiations, no warnings, just the staccato scream of gunfire. It began with a burst from the tree line, Burkinabe marksmen taking out the lead vehicle's tires. Then chaos. Dust clouds erupted, headlights swung wildly, Mercs dismounted into crossfire. One tried to radio for air support, but the signal was already jammed. Traoré was in the thick of it, moving low between burnt-out vehicles, barking orders, dragging a wounded corporal to cover. Bullets snapped overhead. A grenade landed meters away. He kicked it down a slope before it detonated. Then it happened. A sniper positioned on the ridge locked eyes on him. Traoré turned too late. A shot cracked, but the bullet never reached him. Kawanda dove, tackling Traoré to the ground, the round slicing through his own shoulder. Blood sprayed across Traoré's uniform. "Stay down!" Kawanda growled through clenched teeth, dragging himself into a firing position and picking off the sniper with 2 clean shots. The battle raged for 20 minutes. When the dust settled, 13 enemy fighters lay dead. The rest fled back across the border, some abandoning weapons, others their wounded. The Burkinabe had taken casualties, but the line had held. Traoré stood slowly, helped Kawanda to his feet. His eyes swept the field, not with triumph, but with something colder, resolve. "They wanted to bring war to our door," he said. "Let them see. We opened the door ourselves." He turned to his remaining men. "This isn't just defense anymore. From now on, we strike first." The sun was rising behind him, casting long shadows over the smoking wreckage. The border had not fallen, but mercy had. The battlefield was quiet now. The dead had been counted. The wounded were stabilized. Smoke curled above the trees like morning incense. Traoré stood alone at the edge of the clearing, his boots stained with blood and soot, the satellite phone in his hand still warm from encrypted transmission logs. He dialed. There was no official protocol, no assistant, no diplomatic chain. Just 2 presidents, 2 men, finally speaking without intermediaries. The line clicked open, no greeting. Traoré spoke first. "You failed." There was a pause, just long enough to carry the weight of acknowledgement. Then Ouattara's voice came through, calm, but without its usual polish. "Not yet," he said. "This is only one hand in a very long game." Traoré narrowed his eyes, watching the sunrise inch over the horizon. "You sent mercenaries. You paid my people to kill me, and still I'm standing. How many more hands do you think you have left?" There was a breath on the other end. No denial, no apology. "You don't understand, Captain. This isn't about you. This is about the idea you represent. Men like you, they inspire fire, and fire spreads. If I fall, others will rise in my place. Traoré's jaw tensed. He stared into the dying embers of a burnout truck nearby, its twisted metal glowing like bone beneath the heat. Then let them rise, he said, voice like stone. I'll still be here. He didn't wait for a response. He ended the call. The silence that followed was louder than the war. He stood still for a moment longer, letting the words settle, not just into the earth, but into memory. He knew Ouattara was right. This battle was not the end. It was the beginning. Traoré turned, the wind catching his cape as the first true light of morning touched his face. The sky, once black with smoke, was now a deep bruised orange, and behind him, his soldiers watched, not for commands, but for conviction. They had it, because in a world of shadows, one man had finally spoken in the dark without blinking, and refused to kneel. Global outlets break the Operation Fog scandal. Leaked files prove Ouattara's office bankrolled mercenaries and disinformation. Under UN scrutiny and mass protests, Abidjan issues quick denials. Too late. Basimatu is intercepted on the coastal highway to Ghana. In his briefcase, burner phones, crypto ledgers, and a handwritten note from GB. Photos of his arrest flood social media. Facing incontrovertible evidence, Ivorian civil society coalitions demand a full inquiry, chanting, "No more wars in our name." The regime's facade of respectability crumbles. Loyal ministers defect to save themselves. What begins as candlelit vigils in Ouagadougou becomes a trans-Sahelian tide of solidarity. Tens of thousands march on both sides of the border, waving split flags stitched together. In Bobo Dioulasso, a 10-year-old girl hoists a cardboard sign, "Africa is not for sale." Rather than revenge, crowds call for truth commissions and cross-border reconstruction teams. Traoré travels without escort, visiting bomb-scarred schools, delivering seed grants to widows, and breaking ground on a clinic funded jointly by Ivorian and Burkinabe volunteers. Cameras capture former enemies, rebuilding roofs side by side. Hope feels tangible, like mortar between bricks. From a simple wooden podium in an open stadium, Traoré speaks to a continent tuned in by radio, stream, and word of mouth. They tried to buy our loyalty, but loyalty can't be bought. It is earned in trust, in blood, in dignity. Let this be the last betrayal. Let borders stand, yet hearts unite. Let Africa rise, together. Thunderous applause rolls across the stands and through digital airwaves. In that moment, the story shifts from war to possibility, a roadmap etched not in lines of battle, but in shared resolve. Ash from the past, gold for the future. The struggle between Ibrahim Traoré and Alassane Ouattara is more than a duel of presidents. It's a mirror held up to the soul of a continent. At its heart lies a dilemma every nation, every community, even every family eventually faces. Do we build our future by trading integrity for convenience, or by doubling down on trust when it is hardest to find? The plot's twists, ghost mercenaries, weaponized headlines, money in suitcases, reveal how modern conflict rarely begins with bullets. It begins with a single-sided story repeated until doubt feels safer than truth. Yet the same technology that spreads disinformation can also expose it. Independent reporters, a grieving child holding a cardboard sign, and villagers refusing to sell their loyalty remind us that courage thrives in unexpected places. Traoré's final message is not about the triumph of one leader over another. It is about rediscovering the quiet power of ordinary people, choosing solidarity over suspicion. Looking forward, the real victory will not be measured by borders defended or regimes toppled, but by classrooms rebuilt, fact-based journalism nurtured, and alliances forged on dignity rather than debt. If West Africans can transform ashes into foundations, it challenges the rest of us to examine where we, too, might trade short-term comfort for lasting honor. What small act of loyalty or truth-telling could you choose today that, with enough voices, might rewrite a larger story? This story is a dramatized narrative inspired by real public figures. Ibrahim Traoré, Alassane Ouattara, and all individuals mentioned are real people whose actions and public personas have shaped contemporary discourse. While the dialogue and settings have been fictionalized for storytelling purposes, the emotions, questions, and issues raised reflect genuine societal conversations. Thank you for watching and reflecting with us. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think, please consider subscribing to Captain of Truth. We bring real people, real tensions, and real turning points to life, one story at a time. Subscribe now. Your curiosity fuels the next story.